Yeah.
So, Mr. Adjudicator, today we're debating about something very, very difficult. We're debating about where to draw the line. We think religious leaders have freedom to speak about certain ideas. Like, for instance, if I'm a religious leader of the Catholic Church, then I have a freedom to express on a certain issue regarding abortion, or regarding war, or regarding like national security. But then we think there's a clear distinction between me expressing my opinion regarding certain issue or certain policies versus me explicitly actively supporting certain campaigns, actively supporting certain politicians or certain parties. We think when we're defining this motion, endorsing politician, we define it both in an implicit and explicit way. We think when this like religious leaders, for instance, like the Bishop of Catholic Church, appear together with a certain politician in campaigns, like give them like support or maybe make public statement of how they support these politicians or this like party and etc. We think that should be limited. Okay, we think the line that we are trying to draw is therefore very, very clear. We are limiting the active endorsement of a politician or a party. We think this is justified because when it comes to abortion, like when a Catholic leader talks about abortion, we think they're fine to talk about a certain area because it's only one policy area that they're discussing. But we think when supporting a certain party or certain politician as a whole, we think they are talking about the wide range of policies that have impact on overall society and overall general public who's not even religious, and we think that's why it should be limited. So why do I believe so? So let me go into my first constructive regarding how the nature of religion is not in line with the democratic principles. We think we all know that in democracy, we uphold this principle of secularism, the distinction between the church and the state. Why do we uphold this principle? It's because of the nature of religion. We think religion itself is completely fine, that you have freedom to believe in certain God or believe in certain religious doctrine. We think, but then nature of religion is not always inherently rational. We think the rationality that the religion only provides to these individuals is basically the words of God or the words coming from this religious leader. So it's very, very difficult for individuals to question what is right and wrong. And we think when you're using this idea of religious doctrine to make personal choices, like for example, I'm against abortion, I'm going to protest for anti-war, we think that's perfectly fine. But we think when you're voting, when you're actually choosing a party or choosing a politician that's going to affect like every other individual in the society, we think that thinking rationally is therefore very, very important. We think it's not okay for a certain religious leader to influence political decisions of other individuals because these choices will affect other people and so many other people in the society that's not even religious. So why do we need to draw a distinction between church and the state? I have two levels of analysis. First analysis regarding religious leaders. We think religious leaders don't always represent certain religion, don't always represent everything about religious doctrines, Mr. Speaker. We think sometimes that's why we see like religion, like even in the church or even in like Muslims, that we see the divisions, we see like different interpretations of Bibles or Qurans, and then we see like religious leaders abusing their power to be politicized and etc. We think religious leaders basically sometimes manipulate the word of God as into saying you should do this and you should not do this, and they don't always represent religious doctrine, so we think that should be limited. Yes, sir.
So what if the religious member choose the certain politicians because that politician proposed the policy which is loved by religious leader? Are you okay with that?
We think it's not okay for a religious leader to simply say, oh, I love this politician, therefore we want to vote for this politician, because you're not thinking rationally of you're not having a discussion, you're not having a debate regarding the policies that this party member or this candidate is coming up with. You're simply saying, oh, this person is pro-church or this person is against abortion, therefore let's vote for him. We think that is simply wrong. Second analysis is regarding how it brings a clear harm. We think once religious leaders can actively endorse politicians or political parties, it gives an incentive for politicians to stretch out and then reach out to these religious groups. So if I'm an American politician, then I'm going to stretch to religious groups like, for example, church, because there are so many people going to church in America. We think there is a clear harm because now this politician have a direct incentive to engage to this religion and influence this many people who goes to church, who believes in religion, and etc. We think when there is a clear harm, there should be a line drawn so that they don't actively engage on this religion or influence people in a certain manner. Let me move on to my second idea regarding how it's going to harm individuals' free will. We already told you how religious dogmas and values are not very questionable. It's not up for you to discuss or debate on certain issues, right? So we do allow you to have freedom of religion, but when you see, we think like individual choosing certain candidate or certain party is basically better. Why? Because there are many sets of policies that you can apply your religious ideas into. So even if I'm against abortion because I'm Catholic or Christian and whatnot, if I'm against the war, I'm going to, calculate different sets of policies that a certain party or certain politician will come up with, and therefore I will make my rational choice to choose Democrats over Republican. We think this process will simply go missing once your religious leader tells you, okay, I think this policy is good, I think this candidate is good, we're going to support this party, and etc. We think because now there's a fear of disagreeing with your religious leader, now there's a fear of going against somehow to your religion or religious doctrine. It takes away that process of thinking, process of comparing different sets of policies to choose the best candidate that's also in line with your religious values, or choose a party that's in line with your religious values. So we think there should be a clear distinction between church and the state. So, Mr. Speaker, we think when we live in a society, in a democratic society where your freedom of free speech and freedom of religion is guaranteed, we think it also comes with responsibility. Therefore, religious leaders shouldn't simply influence other individuals based on the fact that they are, representing the words of God. Therefore, we are proud to propose.
Mr. Speaker, the notions that the proposition side comes up and debates about, we believe that to some extent are misleading in today's debate. We think that the very idea and the premise of most of their harms that the Prime Minister came up and talked about was predicated upon the idea that people choose blindly and people choose random politicians instead of thinking about either their own personal interest or any reason upon why they would pick a particular politician. What we're going to prove to you in today's debate is, number one, upon why that premise is wrong to begin with, and why, number one, this motion actually denies political freedom to certain individuals, which is a basic fundamental right in a Western liberal democracy, which we assume is happening in today's debate. And second of all, why the notion of endorsement can be extended towards several aspects, and why the idea of disendorsement is also not possible under the model of the proposition side. We believe this is particularly important because the ideas of checks and balances are one of the predicated ideas of a Western liberal democracy. Before I go into that, let me engage to what the Prime Minister has talked about within her speech today. Because first of all, she talked about this idea in saying that, as she said before, she talked about the ideas of people blindly choosing individuals, and therefore, because there is no way of checking and balancing upon whether that ideology is true or not, this could lead to certain harms. First of all, Mr. Speaker, we deny the premise in saying that people are choosing blindly upon whether or not they like this politician or not. When they listen to a pastor or they listen to a priest talking about a particular politician, there are two case scenarios that we can talk about. First of all, there is a case scenario in where that politician is actually endorsing someone because of certain religious reasons. But Mr. Speaker, we believe that the very idea that this person is endorsing someone because of their religious reason is not something to be criticized to begin with, because religious doctrines and political doctrines can be very correlated at the end of the day. If a particular politician goes against abortion laws and therefore this priest wants to help this individual regarding politicians, then we believe that's perfectly fine to do so. But additionally, we also think that regarding the ideas of visions, it's not a simple matter of people choosing particular politicians because of their ideology. We also believe that the visions that these particular priests have are also legitimate, Mr. Speaker. It's not only simply based on policies, but it's also based upon the vision, the ideology that a particular politician will have. That's why we have political parties to begin with, Mr. Speaker, because although there might be disputes regarding policies in a party, there's always reason upon why we pick a particular liberal idea or whether we pick a conservative idea. That vision is legitimate to begin with. But even if we do agree that these people are choosing blindly, because of their religious ideologies or whatnot, we believe that the very fact that you are choosing blindly also includes the ideas of policies. Because what she said was that some religious individuals, religious people or religious leaders can say that, oh, I like abortion laws, or I like maybe like gay rights laws, then the very fact that these people are choosing blindly actually decreases the legitimacy of that vote to begin with. So if you guys want to stay consistent within this policy, then you also have to ban the fact that people are choosing, you also have to ban religious leaders from endorsing in particular policies as well, Mr. Speaker, if you guys want to stay consistent. So for these reasons, we believe that the very notion that people choose blindly doesn't really make sense, and even if it does make sense, we believe that you guys are being inconsistent within today's debate. But additionally, she talked about stretching to religious groups. If we break the premise in saying that there's a particular harm to begin with, then we actually believe that it's very good that these politicians actually stretch out to these minorities and try to listen to all of their opinions. If the majority of the congregation is actually within that church, then it's very beneficial, and politicians have a right to go to that congregation and try to persuade as many people as possible. We don't understand upon why that's a harm to begin with. Let's go into my own particular substantive, which is number one, upon why this motion denies political freedom. We believe that the very principle of a representative democracy is valuing the principle of persuasion, Mr. Speaker. Regardless of background, as long as you fulfill your obligations, you have a right to participate as a candidate, but additionally, there are no restrictions on what type of casual talk you have regarding politics with individual people. We believe that religious leaders are being denied the right to express who they favor and who they don't favor. They should have that right to express preferences, because they will also take the consequences of the results, Mr. Speaker. If these religious leaders do not have a chance to participate in whether they like this person or not, they are simply left out and isolated from society, and the society will decide which politician will influence the religious leaders and those religious people, Mr. Speaker. And if I believe that this particular politician will make a world a better place and a place that I want to live in, then I should have a right to endorse this person and prefer this person, regardless of religious ideologies, because I am also an individual citizen living within that democracy. Yes, ma'am.
We're not banning these people from talking about their ideas. We're saying that when you're using God, words of God, to make people to simply blindly follow you, we think that should be limited.
Right, so the two things that you just talked about were very blurred to begin with, Mr. Speaker, because on one side you say that you are talking about your own ideas, which is happening in the status quo, and additionally, you are blindly talking to people. We believe that's blurred within itself, Mr. Speaker. We don't think that there's a clear distinction between those two, because obviously, we don't think that priests go to a church and say, ladies and gentlemen, pick Mitt Romney because... And then it just ends like that. That's obviously not the case, Mr. Speaker. They have a legitimate reason, because, Mr. Speaker, we don't think that people who go to churches are just stupid, Mr. Speaker. They have their own reasons on why they want to elect another individual. Secondly, why endorsement isn't possible. We believe that not only does this prevent endorsement, it prevents the clarification of political leaders, Mr. Speaker. What do we mean by this? The process of an election engages in many forms of debate, but some political candidates appeal to the public on many agendas, even including what religion they believe in, Mr. Speaker. However, on opposition side, we believe that there should be a process in clarifying if those statements are true, but this particular motion prevents it from happening if the religious leader is incapable of verifying that fact, Mr. Speaker. So a political leader comes up to the arena and says that I am Catholic, but the people who can verify those people on whether they're religious or not are the religious leaders, and therefore it decreases the capacity for checks and balances in this case, because now you cannot endorse it and you cannot disendorse these people from clarifying upon whether these statements are true or not. So therefore, because checks and balances are decreased and because political rights are taken away from these leaders, we are very proud to oppose.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have an interesting debate so far about the role of religion in state and politics. Now, we agree with the opposition leader that religion plays an important role in people's lives. In fact, that's also what we said. And we said because of that, we have to be more careful about what religious leaders, not just the faith or individuals, can motivate. What a leader who represents a religion can or cannot say and can or cannot do. We don't think they should endorse someone because we think that is akin to advertising and lobbying for a specific individual or a party, but we think it's okay for them to discuss ideology, and I'll make that distinction. We thank the previous speaker for providing an excellent clash to our debate, and he provided three, and there are going to be 3 points of which I'll engage his speech, right? So firstly, can people choose freely? Secondly, is it good that people are reaching out, or politicians are reaching out to religious groups? And thirdly, is this against the right of an individual to endorse, which was his major substantive? Then I'm going to extend our point and talk about why politicization of religion is a bad idea and how this will negatively impact some minority groups. But firstly, can people choose? Now, obviously we agree with him. We don't think that everybody who belongs to a faith becomes stupid. But we also agree that their religion is very powerful. To some extent, people of faith will even deny treatment to themselves or their children because their faith says that you cannot do these things, right? So it's an important motivator. As my previous speakers discussed, it's not something that people open up to debate or to criticize. When I stand at a pulpit, I speak on the voice of God, right, down to you, and we think that's a huge role. So we think that it must have an impact. If they say it has no impact whatsoever, then why are they encouraging people to endorse these leaders, right? So they say, obviously it has some impact. We think that impact is a wrong impact, right? So on whether or not it has an impact or not, we think it obviously does. But more important, we should question the value of that impact, like how powerful that impact is, right? And this is, we think, they missed the analysis that Shigang was positioning, that where that person is standing up there, the distinction is as an individual versus as a representative of a state. So they said you remove an individual's rights. Well, if as an individual I want to sign a petition, I want to go door to door, I want to speak to my friends and neighbors, I as an individual have that right. But when I stand up as a representative of the Catholic Church, then I am representing something else. And we think that's a huge problem, and that's not something that they should be allowed to do. They said, well, you're contradicting yourself because you can endorse a position but not a politician. We think that's an important distinction, and again, something that we discussed. If my ideology says that abortion is right or wrong, obviously that's something I can discuss in church and talk about why that as something is something that you should do. But when I pick a candidate, that is like advertising. I become lobbying for someone, right? Like I'm a union leader and I say, you should pick this guy. And we're picking this guy and all of his things together. That becomes an official religious endorsement of an individual, not just of a specific policy. Because even if it's a policy, two individuals can accept the same policy, or they can have different nuances on that policy. But when I pick an individual or a party, I'm picking everything that comes with it, and we think that's a huge problem. Yes, sir?
Alright, so are you saying that it's okay for me as an individual religious leader to endorse without my congregation, because problem is that everyone knows who I am, although I might be an individual going door by door?
If you make that distinction, people do those things as a distinction. People can get up and say, I'm here as an individual, I'm not wearing my cloak and collar and all of those things, right? But even if he thinks, this is the problem with their analysis. They say that if there is like a 2% chance that someone will confuse you with a religious leader, then I should allow you to do everything. We think that's a big difference between I maybe know that you are a priest going door to door versus I'm standing at the altar, I'm wearing the collar, there's the Jesus Christ hanging behind me and I'm saying those things. We think there's a huge difference between that, and they cannot just say because there's a 2% chance, therefore we should accept 100%. No, thank you. Then they talked about how reaching out to religious groups is a good thing. We think that's wrong because Shikang already talked about why it leads to lobbying, how there's a distinction between individuals and the community. If you want to know what the community thinks, you can speak to the community. You don't need the self-appointed leaders of God to speak for them. And further, it's going to harm small, minor religious groups, as I will discuss in my extension. Finally, they said it talks about the right of individuals versus the right of organizations. And I've dealt with this already. We're not removing the right of the individual, but we are saying that as a religious organization, you remove this right. Why? Because we think religious organizations are different and special. They're not political organizations, Mr. Speaker. We treat them carefully. We give them some additional rights, right? Now, if they're saying this is okay, will they then allow religious organizations to take out advertisements? The Vatican Church is extremely rich and powerful. Can they then pay money and contribute to Barack Obama or Mitt Romney? Because that's a right that other organizations like unions have. And if they think that's okay, then we want them to support that. But going into my extension on politicization of religion, we think that connecting a religion with a specific political party is bad. It dilutes the value of that religion. It makes people look at a religious organization like any other political organization, and we think that damages the reputation and the integrity of that religion. It damages how people perceive their religion, and if anything, reduces the recruits of their religion. It allows politicians to exploit religious ideals. We don't want a situation where politicians pretend that they represent a religious group or an idea, and that if you include more religious organizations within politicians, this encourages politicians to go out there and just say, on behalf of God God picked me and God did that. What we need to do is remove religion from politics and make it even lesser. But with the damage also they will cause, minority religions we think is powerful. They think it's a good thing that people reach out. This means that Christians will have a much larger say in American politics compared to any other religion, because 80% of America are Christians. Not just Christians, but leaders who claim to represent Christians, and that we think is entirely dangerous. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, in order to maintain the important distinction between church and state, please vote for side government.
Mr. Speaker, I think government has big contradictions, right? I think the line of argument and logic of the government team is that, right? Several peoples cannot differentiate religious and politics, right? That is why some people is going to blindly follow what their religious leaders is going to say. But suddenly, because my first speaker's brilliant POI, Logan said people can differentiate, right? If I don't wear clothes and without cross, and I go to the door by door, and then suddenly that blindly follow the members of religious can differentiate. Yes, he is not endorsed by the God, but he is the individuals, right? If those people can have that differentiations, in the real world, he can do everything. These people is not going to blindly follow the word of the pastors, right? But rather, people is going to think that the pastors is doing without his clothes and cross, because stupid government tell him legally you cannot do something under the name of the God. That is why there will be same influence effect on the government policy. I think this response is not good response of my first speaker's POI. That is why you should do POI every time. With that, I have 3 questions for today's debate, right? First question, why endorsing is important? Second question, does opposition policy dilute the value of religion? Directly clash with Logan's argument. The last argument is going to be about why it is unfair to the religious groups, right? Like government team said, a lot of policy is clash with the religious idea. That is why these groups get a lot of disadvantages. So first question, why endorsing is important, right? We said, policy is not enough. I don't think policy can be a good indicator when you choose the certain politicians. Why this is true? We don't think every politician is going to keep their promise related to the policy, right? Sometimes policy can be changed because situation is going to be changed, right? That is why people choose the certain politicians, because that politician has a certain vision of the countries, right? If I like welfare state, I choose the certain politicians because I believe that politician can make my country as a welfare state. That is why if you ban people from endorsing certain politicians, we think this is a harm to the democratic policy. My first speaker clearly and brilliantly gave the ideas why this is important, right? Because everybody has to follow the consequence of the vote, even if they hate it. That is why in the liberal democratic society, every member of the society must have a right to take part in the process of the vote. I have to persuade other persons, right? If you don't have that opportunity, we think it is unfair. The society force the individuals follow the consequence of the vote. Yes.
So do you think then, by extension of your rights of these organizations, you would allow them to take advertisements or give funding to political candidates?
I think that is a status quo. And then it's too late. It is a status quo. In US, religious groups can lobby and they can fund and they can pay the money to the politicians. I think this is true. And I think it is too late coming from second speaker POI, and then government may trying to do something, but I don't think can, because legally it is banned, right? So we think that giving the endorsing right to the politician should be guaranteed in the democratic society. More than that, my first speaker clearly said why this is the problematic under your policy. Because they said they are okay with endorsing certain policies, right? We think, like I said before, people cannot differentiate. And they said 2 politicians can accept the same policy which is endorsed by religious leader. We think this is the problems. If I am the politicians and I want to get the vote from the religious member, then I just say I like this policy because God yesterday in my dreams I have to choose this policy, right? Even if and the religious leader knows I am lying, religious leader cannot disprove I am not a son of God. Why? Because government policy ban politicians from endorsing certain policies. If you allow this proof, then you don't have any feasibility. And then moving to the second question, why their policy does not dilute the value of religions. Again, this is the contradictions and two different characterizations, right? Just because I support the religious organizations of the politics, that is why people say that religious organization is not a religious organization, and that within the circumstance, the member of the religious group can differentiate, right? Because then can differentiate. More than that, religious group is not going to only do the policy, they do their own religious thingy. That is why I don't think it is the feasible ideas. People just see the religious group as not religious group. Yeah, but and then I think diluting by their value of religion is better than losing certain ideas against the secular the organization. We think this is harm to the religious group more. And moving on to my argument why this is unfair to the religious groups. Like government team said, there's many policies which is clashed by religious groups and secular groups, like abortion, and then the medical procedures, who should pay the welfare system and things like that. This was the last week's the topics. That is why you should know, right? And why this is unfair. If I cannot endorse as a religious leader certain politicians, and politician is going to lose their interest to be supported by the religious groups, right? Because I'm not gonna get the vote what I expected to get, because I will get less support by religious groups. But unlike under their policy, unlike religious groups, secular groups can 100% endorse certain politicians, right? That is why politicians have a more incentive to side with secular groups, and they will get more political power. We think this is the problems. That is why we strongly oppose to this motion.
So why is it a problem?